Hey, you guys, what's up with it? It's your boy with the Mushroom Kingdom right here with a sneak peek of my new story called They Came From Outside. Now, this will be a special podcast that will drop once a week. Every Friday, I'm going to drop an episode. So, get in line because this is going to be a long running podcast. And I hope you enjoy it. Here's a sneak peek of They Came From Outside.
Chapter 1. The Beginning. The tires of the moving truck crunched over the gravel driveway, kicking up dust as it pulled in front of Whitley Manor. The Ashford family sat in their SUV just behind it, staring at the massive, looming structure before them. The mansion stood like a sentinel against the grey sky, its 15 rooms and towering presence swallowed by the thick forest surrounding it. Evelyn Ashford tightened her grip on the steering wheel, a deep unease settling in her stomach. "Well, here we are," she murmured. Thomas Ashford, sitting in the passenger seat, exhaled. "Bigger than I imagined." His voice was steady, but there was something forced about it. The kids in the back seat weren't as reserved. Noah, the oldest, smirked. "Looks like something straight out of a horror movie." Eli, his younger brother, shivered. "Yeah, and we're the dumb family that moves in anyway." Lily, the youngest daughter, peered at the house with wide eyes. "It looks sad." Amelia, the older daughter, rolled her eyes. "It's just a house. Stop being dramatic." Jax, the family's loyal pit bull, whined from the back, ears flattened against his head. He hadn't stopped growling softly since they turned onto the long, empty road leading here. Thomas turned in his seat. "All right, enough. This is our home now. Let's get inside and start unpacking." The family stepped out into the cool evening air. The mansion loomed over them, its once grand exterior worn down by time. Ivy snaked up the sides of the stone walls, and the windows, though intact, were clouded with years of dust. The front door creaked loudly as Thomas pushed it open, revealing a vast foyer with high ceilings, a grand staircase, and a heavy chandelier hanging overhead. The air inside smelled of aged wood, rain-soaked stone, and something else. Something faintly metallic. Evelyn shivered, but forced a smile. "All right, let's make this place feel like home." The kids split up, exploring their new territory. The twins, Noah and Eli, raced up the staircase, eager to claim their rooms. Amelia and Lily hesitated before following, their footsteps echoing in the hollow silence of the house. Jax, however, refused to step inside. He stood at the threshold, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Jax, come on," Thomas called. The dog's ears pinned back, and for a moment, it looked like he would bolt back to the car. But then, reluctantly, he took slow, hesitant steps inside, never taking his eyes off the darkened corners of the mansion. As the family settled in, a faint whisper drifted. Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Unwelcome Guests. The day bled into night quickly, the sky darkening with an unnatural swiftness. The forest surrounding Whitley Manor seemed to grow quieter as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving only the rustling of the wind in the trees. Inside, the Ashford family moved through the cold, sprawling mansion, trying to settle into their new home. The grand chandelier above them flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the hardwood floors. The silence between the rooms felt unnerving, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. Noah, the oldest of the kids, was the first to break the silence. "Okay, I'm calling it now. This place is haunted." He set down a box in the living room and wandered toward one of the old, dusty armchairs. "I mean, look at this place. It's got all the vibes." Evelyn sighed and shook her head. "There's no such thing as ghosts, Noah. Then why does it feel like something's watching us?" "Me?" Noah muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the room, as if expecting something or someone to step out from the shadows. Amelia, who had been unpacking in the upstairs bedroom, joined them, rolling her eyes. "Are you seriously trying to scare us already? You've only been here a few hours." But there was an edge to her voice. She too felt it, the creeping unease that came with living in a house so old, so filled with dark secrets. Jax was the next to make his presence known, though in a much... Chapter 2. Sighing. I mean, look at this place. You felt it, incessantly. Stop, Thomas called. A faint whisper, a soft voice coming from behind the wall at the end of the hallway. Come closer. The words were just barely audible, but they sent a chill up Evelyn's spine. Did anyone else hear that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah, who had been sitting on the armchair, stood up abruptly. What? What did you hear? That voice, Evelyn replied, her heart pounding in her chest. It's coming from the walls. But before she could finish, the house groaned, a low, eerie sound like a deep sigh, and then the faintest scraping noise came from the direction of the basement. It was as if something was dragging itself across the floor, trying to get closer. Okay, I'm out, Noah said, backing away toward the door. I'm seriously not messing with this place. I knew it was cursed the minute we got here. Knock it off, Noah, Eli said, though his voice trembled. He wasn't much braver than his brother. It's just the house settling or something. It's old, right? But even Eli didn't seem convinced. Maybe we should check the basement, Amelia suggested, her voice quiet, yet tinged with curiosity. She was the one who usually sought the truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. Evelyn looked from face to face. Noah's expression was one of defiance, but it was clear he was afraid. Eli was still frozen in place, glancing nervously at the shadows in the hallway. Even Jax, the ever-loyal pit bull, was cowering now, his ears pressed flat against his head. I think we should stick together, Thomas said, his voice steady but filled with tension. Let's check out the basement and make sure everything's all right. We can't just hide from this place. Reluctantly, the family moved toward the basement door. The old wooden steps creaked under their feet, and the air grew colder as they descended into the pitch-black darkness below. The smell of damp earth and decay hung in the air, and Evelyn had to fight the urge to turn back. Jax, however, refused to move down the stairs. He whined from the top, pacing nervously. Stay here, Jax, Thomas muttered, motioning for him to stay. As the family reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in an open room with low, exposed beams. The scraping sound had stopped, but something about the space felt alive, and not in the way a house should. See? It's fine, Noah said, trying to force some confidence. Probably just an old rodent or something. But as they turned to leave, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening bang. The lights flickered. Then something shifted in the shadows, moving toward them from the farthest corner of the basement. The family froze, their breaths caught in their throats. A figure stepped forward, a tall, shadowy silhouette. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. And then the voice. Welcome home. The whisper came from the shadows, deep and guttural. The figure stepped closer, revealing a shape that was not entirely human, its features distorted and wrong. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs stretching at odd angles, like a person in the midst of a grotesque transformation. The air. Chapter 2. Unwelcome guests. The day bled. Chapter 3. History in the walls. The darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment there was nothing, no light, no sound, no air. Just the deep, pressing weight of an unseen force closing in from all sides. Then the lights flickered back on. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest and she gasped, her hand gripping Thomas's arm as if it could anchor her to reality. The figure, the thing that had been standing at the edge of the basement, was gone. What the hell was that? Noah whispered, his voice shaking as he stumbled back against the wall. I don't know, Evelyn managed to say, her breath coming in quick bursts. Her eyes darted around the basement, searching for any sign of the thing that had been there. But it was just a cold, empty room now. Maybe it was just some sort of weird hallucination, Thomas said, trying to sound calm but failing. He wiped a hand across his brow, his usual tough demeanor slipping slightly. We're all just a little on edge. But even as he spoke, the room felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy with something ancient and forgotten. Jax, who had been barking frantically at the top of the stairs, suddenly went silent. The pit bull's ears flattened and he padded down the steps, sniffing the air with cautious curiosity. It's gone, Mom. It's not here anymore, Eli said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Let's get out of here. But as they turned to leave, a sharp sound echoed from deep within the walls, a scraping, like nails on chalkboard, followed by a soft, hollow thud. It came from behind the wooden panels lining the walls of the basement. "What the hell was that?" Noah whispered again, his eyes wide with fear. The family froze, staring at the wall. The scraping noise stopped, but the thud echoed again, louder this time. Evelyn moved first. "We need to check this out. This house has something hidden. I can feel it." With trembling hands, she began to pull at the loose wooden paneling near the corner of the room, revealing a narrow, dark passage. A chill swept through the air, colder than it had been before, and the faintest whisper of movement could be heard from inside the passage. "This wasn't in the plans," Thomas said, his voice low. "There was no mention of any secret passageways." "I don't care what the plans say," Evelyn replied. "We need to know what's behind this." Noah took a step back. "We don't know what's in there. It could be anything." But Evelyn wasn't listening. She pushed the panel aside and stepped into the dark, narrow hallway, motioning for the others to follow. Hesitantly, Thomas stepped behind her, then the children. The passage led to a small, dimly lit room. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. In the center of the room was an altar, covered in old, dried blood, the remnants of something horrific. Noah gagged. This isn't just some old mansion. This is a place of death." Evelyn's eyes scanned the room, her heartbeat quickening as she noticed something even more chilling. The floor was cracked, revealing a series of old, worn books scattered across the ground. As she knelt to pick one up, she felt a cold breeze sweep past her. The pages inside were filled with cryptic writings, things she didn't understand, some written in what looked like a language that wasn't from this world. "Mom, look at this," Eli called out from the other side of the room, his voice trembling. He held up a torn, yellowed piece of paper, its edges singed. The writing on it was barely legible. Evelyn moved toward him, her stomach dropping as she saw the words, "The sacrifice must be made. Only blood can break the curse." "This place, it's not just haunted," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's a tomb, a prison." Suddenly, the air shifted again, growing colder. The whispering sound returned, this time louder, more insistent. "Come closer. Let us in." The room seemed to pulse, the walls groaning with a life of their own. Jax, who had been sniffing around the altar, let out a sharp bark and backed away, his fur standing on end. Something was coming. A low growl echoed from the shadows, followed by a sound that could only be described as wet, like something dragging itself across the ground. And then, another figure stepped from the dark recesses of the room. It wasn't human. It was tall, its body twisted and malformed, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes, dark and hollow, fixed on Evelyn with a hunger that made her stomach churn. Evelyn took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "What the hell is that?" Before anyone could answer, the creature lunged. Chapter 4, The First Encounter. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its sharp, jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. Evelyn didn't even have time to scream as it came for her, its gnarled, spindly fingers reaching out, claws scraping against the air. Her heart pounded in her chest, a primal instinct urging her to move. Move now. In one swift motion, she shoved Thomas aside, throwing herself backward just as the thing's talons slashed through the air where she had been standing. She barely managed to avoid its grasp, but it was close. Too close. "Mom!" Eli screamed, his voice cracking. The creature hissed, the sound like dry leaves scraping across stone as it turned its attention to the children. It was fast, unnaturally fast, and its movements were erratic, like it was powered by something that wasn't entirely alive. Noah yanked Eli back, shielding him with his own body as the creature's gaze turned to them. The room was filled with a sickly stench, something foul that twisted in their stomachs. The air felt like it was closing in, suffocating them. "We need to get out of here," Thomas shouted, pulling Evelyn back toward the narrow passageway, but it was too late. The creature screeched, a high-pitched wail that made the walls tremble, and launched itself at them. It was like a blur, a living nightmare. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of them again, its hand outstretched. But this time, Thomas was ready. He reached for the knife at his belt, pulling it out with a swift motion. The blade sliced through the air, but the creature twisted its body with unnatural agility, avoiding the strike. It was faster, stronger than anything Thomas had ever faced before. The thing let out another shriek, louder than before, and lunged at him. In a desperate attempt, Evelyn grabbed a broken piece of wood from the altar and swung it at the creature. She hit it across the face with a sickening crack, but the impact barely seemed to faze it. The thing snarled, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "We need to run!" Evelyn cried, her voice hoarse with panic. The family scrambled toward the narrow passage, pushing past the creature, who was now howling in fury. But as they reached the doorway, something stopped them. The passage, which had seemed like a potential escape route, was now blocked by a thick, dark fog that had appeared from nowhere. It swirled in the air, clinging to the walls, and seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The creature's screeches echoed through the mist, filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating pressure. "I don't think it's just one thing," Noah whispered, his eyes wide with terror as he clutched Eli. "It's not just a monster. It's a horde." Suddenly, the air shifted again, colder than before, and the fog seemed to grow thicker. The family could barely see each other through the thickening mists. It was as if the house itself was trying to keep them trapped, pushing them deeper into the nightmare. Evelyn's heart raced as she frantically searched the room for any escape. The markings on the walls, those symbols, seemed to be shifting, growing darker, their meaning slipping out of her grasp. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, repeating the same haunting words, "Come closer, let us in, we are many." And then, as if the house itself had decided to claim them, a door at the far end of the room creaked open. It wasn't just a door, it was a portal, a swirling vortex of shadows pulling the very air toward it. The family hesitated, not sure whether to run toward it or away from it. But then they heard it, a voice, a familiar voice. Evelyn. It was a whisper, but it was unmistakable. Evelyn's name, spoken with a tenderness that sent a wave of dread coursing through her veins. She froze, looking toward the open door. For a moment, she could almost swear she saw a figure standing there, someone she knew. "Evelyn, come to me. We can save you." Her legs trembled, and for a heartbeat she was tempted to step forward, to go into the unknown. But then she snapped back to reality. "Mom, don't!" Noah shouted, pulling her back. "It's a trap!" Chapter 4, The First Encounter. The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its sharp, jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. Evelyn didn't. She blinked and swung it at the creature. She hit it across. For a moment, she could almost swear she saw a figure standing there, someone she knew. "Evelyn, come to me, we can save you." Her legs trembled, and for a heartbeat, she was tempted to step forward, to go into the unknown. But then she snapped back to reality. "Mom, don't!" Noah shouted, pulling her back. "It's a trap!" The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the air in the room felt thick, oppressive, like something was pressing in from all sides. Before anyone could move, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, cutting off the eerie whispers. The fog dispersed, and the room fell silent. For a moment, they all just stood there, disoriented, trying to process what had just happened. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps. What was that? What is this place?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Whatever it is, it's not over. This house is trying to break us, but we're not going to let it." Chapter 5, The Hidden Truth. The silence in the basement was oppressive. Even the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Evelyn's heart still hammered in her chest, and her breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. They had barely escaped the creature, if that's even what it was, and now they were trapped in a nightmarish limbo. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something metallic and foul. Jax, ever the vigilant dog, was the first to react. He barked, low and sharp, before darting toward the farthest corner of the room, his body tense and alert. His hackles stood straight up as his eyes locked on a small section of the wall where the darkness seemed to gather unnaturally. The air grew colder, and Evelyn's skin prickled as if the house itself was drawing in a deep breath, preparing for something terrible. "Jax, stop!" Thomas said, his voice strained. He stepped forward, but the dog refused to budge, growling louder now. "We need to leave. Noah urged, his voice cracking. His eyes darted nervously to the edges of the room. There's something wrong with this place. We have to get out before it's too late. Evelyn glanced back at the stairs. They were blocked, suffocating the way they'd come. The same oppressive fog filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. It's too late for that, Amelia said, her voice hushed but resolute. She was the calmest of them all, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She stepped toward the center of the room, her gaze tracing the walls, studying the symbols. These markings, she murmured, they're not just decorations, they're rituals, ancient ones. Rituals? Thomas's voice was skeptical, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. They're meant to bind something, Amelia continued, her hands tracing the strange symbols etched into the walls. Something trapped here, something that feeds on fear. Noah shuddered, looking over his shoulder. I told you this place was cursed. This is insane. We need to get out now. I'm not leaving until we know what's going on, Evelyn said firmly, glancing at her family. She could see the doubt in their eyes, but also the fear. They didn't want to leave, but they didn't want to stay either. It was a fight between survival instincts and the need for answers. There was a sudden shift in the air, cold, biting, and the scraping noise returned. It wasn't coming from the walls this time, but from the far corner of the room, where the shadows were growing deeper. The faintest trace of movement danced within them, like a figure too large to be contained by the darkness. Jax barked again, his voice tinged with desperation. That's not a coincidence, Thomas said, his hand instinctively moving to the gun holstered at his side. There's something behind that wall. The others froze. Mom, look, Eli said, his voice trembling. Over there! It's moving! Evelyn turned, her stomach sinking. The shadows at the corner of the room had shifted. It wasn't just a trick of the light. A dark figure had materialized from the depths, almost like it had been woven from the darkness itself. A low growl vibrated through the room, reverberating in their bones, like it was coming from deep underground. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears as the thing slowly stepped out of the shadows, the stench of rot and decay thick in the air. Its form was misshapen, twisting with every step, like a mass of shadows struggling to maintain a human shape. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long, fingers curving into claws that scraped across the floor, leaving marks in the old stone. I knew it, Noah whispered, backing away. We're not alone. A voice, deep and guttural, rasped from the figure's throat. You shouldn't have come. You are the offering. The words sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. The room seemed to close in, the walls tightening as if the house itself was about to devour them. Her eyes darted around for an escape, but the fog, thick and suffocating, had sealed them in. The creature's eyes, black, soulless pits, focused on her, and for a moment she felt its presence inside her mind. It was watching her, studying her thoughts, her fears. The weight of its gaze pressed against her, cold and suffocating. Evelyn, the voice whispered again, but this time it was different, familiar, almost comforting. It was her mother's voice. Her heart skipped a beat. No, Evelyn breathed, stepping back. No, that's not possible. But the voice continued as if calling from beyond the grave. You cannot run. Come to me. We can end this. You don't have to suffer anymore. She stumbled back, shaking her head. No, I won't. I won't let you in. The figure grinned, an unnatural, twisted grin, and it stepped closer, its long limbs stretching, its form distorting in and out of focus like a broken mirror. It wasn't just the creature. It was the house itself, the cursed foundation, pulling them in. The room seemed to swirl, the floor beneath their feet tilting, and Evelyn realized with a sickening lurch that they weren't just trapped physically. The house had begun to infiltrate their minds, turning their own fears, their own memories against them. Whatever was here, it fed on those fears. Jax barked, snapping her out of her thoughts, and with a growl, the creature lashed out. Its claws slashed across the air, but Thomas was faster. He reached for the gun at his side and fired. The shot rang out, deafening, echoing through the basement, but it did nothing. The creature only shrieked, the sound splitting the air like glass shattering. Run! Thomas shouted. We need to get out of here. Now! Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed Eli and pulled him toward the narrow passage they had come through earlier, but the fog was closing in again. She could feel the weight of it, dragging them back into the room. The walls seemed to pulse, as if alive with dark energy. "Not this way!" Noah shouted, pointing toward another door, one that had appeared on the opposite side of the room. It had materialized from the shadows like it had been waiting for them. Without thinking, Evelyn ran toward it. Behind her, the creature howled, its voice growing more animalistic, more desperate. Jax was right behind them, barking furiously, his body a blur of motion. But as they reached the door, something horrific happened. The walls closed in on them, trapping them. The doorway that had appeared just moments ago was gone. They were completely surrounded. The creature's eyes gleamed in the darkness. There is no escape. To be continued in Chapter 6, No Way Out. Chapter 6, No Way Out. The world around them felt like it was falling apart. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her breaths shallow and ragged. The creature's presence was suffocating, like a dark, oppressive force pressing down on her and her family. She could feel the walls of the room closing in, the weight of the air becoming unbearable. The shadows seemed to stretch toward them, twisting and curling, as if they had a life of their own. The door that had appeared just moments ago was gone, vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving them trapped. The mist was thick, swirling, crawling into every corner of the room like it was alive. The creature, with its long, gaunt limbs and soulless eyes, stood just a few feet away, grinning as it slowly advanced. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice like a rasping breath, its words crawling into their minds. The fog around them grew denser, colder, and Evelyn could feel it. Something was feeding on their fear. They weren't just trapped physically, they were trapped in their own minds, their deepest anxieties beginning to surface, clawing at them from within. Jax snarled, his hackles raised, but even the brave pit bull seemed unnerved by the sheer presence of the creature. He barked, but his voice cracked with fear, as though he too sensed the impossibility of their situation. "I will consume you," the creature continued, its voice warping into something alien. The words were both a threat and a promise. Evelyn glanced around, her eyes desperately searching for any way out, any escape from the nightmare they had walked into. She tried to push forward, but the air felt thick and viscous, as though she was wading through water, the pressure building with each step. Her mind raced. She thought of the markings on the walls, the symbols, the blood-stained altar, the books filled with cryptic, maddening language. This house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had been waiting for them. "Mom," Eli whispered, clutching her arm, his face pale. His voice was trembling with fear. Chapter 6, No Way Out. The world around them felt like it was falling apart. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her breaths shallow and ragged. The creature's presence was suffocating, like a dark, oppressive force pressing down on her at its each one hiding something sinister behind it. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the house like the beat of a drum. But there was something else. A faint, low hum that seemed to reverberate through the walls. It was as if the house itself was alive, pulsing with dark energy. They finally reached a set of stairs leading down, deep into the bowels of the mansion. The temperature dropped with every step, the cold seeping into their bones. As they descended, the air grew denser, and the walls seemed to close in around them, pushing them deeper into the depths of the house. The darkness seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive, until Evelyn could barely see the others. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic pounding of her own heart in her ears. She could feel the presence of the creature, the thing they had barely escaped, stalking them from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, at the very bottom of the stairs, they found it. A large iron door stood in front of them, its surface covered in ancient symbols. The door was old, its edges rusted, but it pulsed with an energy that made Evelyn's blood run cold. The symbols etched into it were the same ones she had seen on the walls upstairs, the same ones that had appeared in the strange book. Evelyn reached out, her fingers trembling as she placed them on the cold metal. She could feel the heat of the creature's presence growing stronger behind her. "We're here," Thomas said, his voice low. "This is the heart of the house." Evelyn pushed open the door, and what lay beyond would change everything. Chapter 7. Rumors at School. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the thick trees that surrounded the mansion. Danksville was still cloaked in the suffocating mist that clung to the town like a memory of something forgotten. The Ashford family had barely slept, their minds haunted by the events of the previous night. Each of them felt the weight of something unseen pressing in, the house continuing to close in on them, even as the world outside seemed unaware. The kids, especially the younger ones, struggled to process the horrors they had witnessed. The creature, the suffocating darkness, the sense that the house itself was alive, watching them, waiting. But for the moment, they had to go on with their lives. At Danksville High School, whispers floated like smoke through the crowded hallways. Students exchanged looks, their voices hushed, as if afraid to speak too loudly. A few bold ones dared to ask the Ashford children about their new home, but they quickly regretted it. "You live at Whitley Manor, right?" one of the girls asked Noah, her voice dripping with curiosity. Her name was Karen, a girl from his history class, and her wide eyes seemed to gleam with the thrill of gossip. "I heard it's haunted. People say the house has secrets." Noah stiffened, his grip on his books tightening. He didn't want to admit what they were going through. He didn't want to seem like a fool, spouting off wild stories about ghosts or monsters. Yet, in the back of his mind, he knew that whatever was happening to them was no longer something he could ignore. "Rumors are rumors," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "It's just an old house." But Karen wasn't done. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My cousin Sarah used to live near there. She said she saw some strange things, people going in and never coming out. One night, she saw a shadow walking around the house, but when she looked again, it was gone." Noah's stomach twisted. He wanted to brush it off, laugh it off, but something about Karen's tone, something in the air, made him uneasy. "You know," Karen continued, oblivious to his discomfort, "some say the house was built on a burial ground, and there's that one room, the one that's always locked. No one knows what's behind it. People in town think it's cursed." Noah's mind raced back to the ritual room they had found in the mansion. The iron door, the symbols, the creature. All of it felt connected to the whispers Karen was sharing. But there was no way he was going to tell her that. "I don't know about that," he replied, his voice more firm than he felt. "It's just an old place, nothing special." But his words felt hollow, and Karen didn't look convinced. She smiled knowingly, clearly enjoying the thrill of scaring him. She was a part of the larger town rumor mill, where tales of the Ashford family's new home were already becoming something of a local legend. And it wasn't just Karen. Students around the school, even the teachers, had heard their own versions of the tale. Later that day, as Evelyn dropped the kids off at school, she overheard a conversation between two women standing in the parking lot. "I heard the Ashford family moved into that old Whitley place," one of them was saying, her voice laced with gossip. "You know, the one in the forest? The one that's cursed?" "Yeah, I heard it's haunted," the other woman replied, her voice low. "Some say the house is alive, that it feeds off people's fears. I wouldn't go near it if you paid me." The words hit Evelyn like a slap in the face. The rumors had started. The whispers had found their way into the town. And now, it wasn't just the family that was in danger. It was everyone around them. Evelyn's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where she could see Eli and Thomas getting out of the car, their faces drawn and pale, as if the weight of the house was already bearing down on them. She wanted Chapter 7, Rumors at School. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the thick. Hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes the town's fear and spreading the atmosphere of dread. Should I keep expanding on the school rumors? Chapter 7, Rumors at School. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the thick trees that Chapter 8, The Town Knows. As dusk fell over Danksville, the town seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, thick with whispers and stares, as if everyone had become suddenly aware of something they couldn't quite grasp. The faint hum of the forest seemed to vibrate through the streets. It's unsettling. Chapter 8. The town knows. As dusk fell over Danksville, the town seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, thick with whispers and stares, as if everyone had become suddenly aware of something they couldn't quite grasp. The faint hum of the forest seemed to vibrate through the streets, its unsettling presence a reminder of the dark woods that surrounded Whitley Manor. Evelyn watched from the porch of the mansion as neighbors drove by, their eyes flicking nervously to the house before quickly averting their gazes. The small town had always been quiet, but now it felt as if the pulse of Danksville had changed, something darker lying just beneath the surface. The Ashford family was no longer just new residents. They were the subject of every conversation, every rumor that twisted its way through the tight-knit community. Inside, the house groaned and creaked like it was alive, its oppressive weight growing stronger. The kids were still in their rooms, too afraid to venture downstairs, as if the shadows themselves might reach out and drag them back into the dark corners of the house. Jax, too, remained curled up by the door, his sharp eyes constantly darting to the windows, as though waiting for something to appear in the woods. But Evelyn knew she couldn't hide from the truth any longer. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wasn't content to wait quietly for them to figure it out. No, it was playing with them, pulling them in deeper, feeding off their fear and the fear of those around them. As the night deepened, she decided to take a walk through the small town, needing to clear her head, needing to understand how far the grip of the mansion had spread. She moved quickly, the pavement beneath her feet cool and unforgiving. The quiet streets were eerily empty for this time of evening, but it didn't take long before she came across her first sign that the town was beginning to change. Two women stood in front of the local diner, their heads bent low as they spoke in hushed voices. Evelyn tried to keep walking, but their words cut through the stillness, each one like a knife. "I hear it's not just haunted," one of them said, her voice tight with barely suppressed fear. "They're saying the Ashfords are in real danger. That house, it's got something inside, some kind of evil." The other woman's voice dropped even lower, the air around her seeming to hum with unease. "My brother swears he heard screams coming from the woods near the house last night. He's worked in the forest for years, and he said there's something out there. He didn't want to say what, but I've heard stories. People don't just disappear from around here without reason." Evelyn's heart sank. She tried to ignore the creeping sensation in her chest, the nagging feeling that they were being watched. But the weight of the conversation hung heavy in the air, thickening it like fog. The first woman spoke again, and Evelyn stopped in her tracks, holding her breath. "Didn't anyone tell them about the curse?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't live at Whitley Manor unless you're willing to pay the price." Evelyn didn't need to hear any more. The rumors had already festered, spreading like wildfire throughout the town. She wasn't just worried about her family anymore. She was worried about what this town's fear would do. As she turned to walk back, the words from the women echoed in her mind. The curse. What did they know about Whitley Manor that she didn't? Back at the mansion, Eli sat in his room, trying to shut out the world. The whispers from school haunted him. He couldn't escape them. The stories, the rumors. His phone buzzed in his hand, the name on the screen making his heart skip a beat. Tara. He had always found comfort in her voice, the way she seemed to see past the chaos of his life. But now, he was afraid of what she might say, afraid of the possibility that she might know about the house. Afraid that whatever was happening to them was too big to escape, too real for them to fight alone. He pressed the button to answer, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound calm. "Eli, is everything okay?" Tara's voice was sweet, comforting, but there was something in her tone that made him freeze. He glanced out his window, the woods looming dark and endless beyond the edge of the yard. "Aye?" Eli hesitated, not sure how to explain. "Things are strange here at the house." Tara was... Chapter 8. Vibrate through the streets. The small town had always been quiet, did its way through the tight-knit back into the dark court. This wasn't just haunted. She decided to take a walk, but it didn't take long before she came like a knife. The woman's voice dropped even stories. People hearing it like fog, and didn't need to hear. The curse. His phone buzzed in his hand. The possibility that she might know about the house, afraid that whatever was happening to them was too big to escape, too real for them to fight alone. He pressed the button to answer, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound calm. "Eli, is everything okay?" Tara's voice was sweet, comforting, but there was something in her tone that made him freeze. He glanced out his window, the woods looming dark and endless beyond the edge of the yard. Eli hesitated, not sure how to explain. "Things are strange here, at the house." Tara was silent for a moment. Chapter 8. The seemed to vibrate. Small town that twisted its way through the and dragged them back. The house was the night deep, eerily empty, but their words cut through some kind of air. He didn't want to say what. You don't live at Whitley, as she took. He couldn't escape. But now, efforts to sound calm. "Eli, is everything that anyone who lives there disappears, that it's cursed?" Tara's words felt like they were stabbing him from a distance, each syllable punctuated by the rising dread in her voice. "Eli, you have to get out of there, before it's too late." Eli's breath hitched. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't just rumors, that the house was alive, that it was feeding on them, but he couldn't bring himself to speak the words. What if she didn't believe him? What if she thought he was losing his mind? "I can't leave," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't. There's something in that house. I don't know how to stop it." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Tara spoke again, her voice quieter now, filled with an eerie sadness. "Eli, whatever you do, don't trust the house. It is the one that's going to take you. Don't let it win." The phone call ended. Chapter 8. The town knows. Every rumor that reach out longer. The quiet. He's worked in the forest. The nag tell them about the curse. Her family in his room, trying to shut out the world. The whispers from school haunted him. His voice barely. She didn't believe him. What if she thought he was losing his mind? "I can't leave," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't. There's something in that house. I don't know how to stop it." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Tara spoke again, her voice quieter now, filled with an eerie sadness. "Eli, whatever you do, don't trust the house. It is the one that's going to take you. Don't let it win." The phone call ended abruptly, and Eli stared at the screen for a long time, his mind racing. It was happening. The town knew. The town was awake to the terror that had gripped Whitley Manor. And worse, now the house knew that they knew. He looked out his window once more, his gaze drawn to the dark, twisted shape of the woods. A chill ran through him, settling deep in his bones. Whatever was in the house, whatever was waiting, it had started to turn the town against them. To be continued. Chapter 9. The house strikes back. The sun barely crept over the horizon, casting a muted light on the eerie landscape of Danksville. The town was waking up, but it felt like a world held in a tight, breathless pause. Evelyn could feel the pressure in the air, the sense that something was about to break. Whitley Manor, with its looming presence at the edge of town, was no longer just a house. It had become a force, a malign entity feeding on the fear it had planted deep within the town. And now, it was beginning to strike back. Evelyn had barely closed her eyes the night before, the house's creaks and groans becoming louder, more insistent, as if the walls themselves were alive and eager to reveal their secrets. When she woke, she found herself staring at the ceiling, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. She could hear the whispers again, soft and insidious, threading through the house like a breeze too cold to be natural. The kids were downstairs, eating a quiet breakfast. Their faces were drawn, pale from lack of sleep and the heaviness of their shared dread. Jax lay next to the table, his tail tucked tightly against his body. He hadn't barked in hours, hadn't shown any signs of his usual energy. It was like the life had been drained out of him too. "We need to talk," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the silence. Her words hung in the air like a warning, and all eyes turned to her. "What's going on, Mom?" Noah asked, his voice shaky but resolute. The nightmares had caught up with him too. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but Evelyn could see the wariness in his eyes. He was scared. He just didn't know how to say it. "I don't know how to explain this, but something's happening," Evelyn replied, glancing at the stairs as if expecting the house to answer her. "The town is talking about us. They're scared. And now, I think it's spreading beyond us. This isn't just about the house anymore. The house knows." The kids exchanged nervous glances, the weight of her words settling on their shoulders. They had all felt it. Chapter 9, The House Strikes Back. The sun barely crept over the windows. He believes that stuff, but his words lacked conviction. He'd been hearing it too. He'd seen the looks, felt the cold air of suspicion creeping through town. No one had told him directly, but everyone was talking about Whitley Manor in hushed tones, like it was a dirty secret too terrible to mention. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the house seemed to let out a long, low groan, the sound echoing through the walls like a warning. The family froze, their breath catching in their throats. Even Jax lifted his head, his eyes locked on the hallway beyond the kitchen. "Did you hear that?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible. No one answered. They couldn't. The house's groan seemed to reverberate in their bones, like it was trying to speak to them, to reach out from beyond the walls. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the hallway, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. The family jumped to their feet, fear flooding their veins. Jax growled low in his throat, and Evelyn's pulse quickened as she rushed toward the source of the noise. In the hallway, the door to the basement stood ajar, the dark abyss beneath it beckoning like a mouth wide open. The sound had come from within. Someone had been in the basement. "Noah," Evelyn whispered urgently. "Get the others. We're not going down there." Noah nodded, his face pale as he rushed to grab the younger kids. But before he could reach the stairs, a cold wind suddenly blasted through the hallway, extinguishing the kitchen lights. The house seemed to inhale, holding its breath, and then everything went dark. The silence was deafening. The kids froze. The only sound in the house was the faint tapping of footsteps, echoing through the walls, the floor creaking as though something heavy was moving through the rooms above them. Then a voice, a low, rasping whisper, drifted down from the shadows. "Get out. Now." It wasn't just a whisper. It was a command. And it was coming from somewhere deep within the house. Jax barked sharply, his fur bristling with terror, but the command only grew louder. The house was alive. It was speaking. It was calling to them. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed Eli by the arm, pulling him toward the front door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to get them out. She had to. But as she reached for the door handle, it shuddered in her grip. The door, the one they had walked through so many times, refused to open. It was as if the house had claimed it, as if the door itself was part of the trap. "What's happening?" Eli cried, fear and panic creeping into his voice. "Mom, what is this?" Evelyn's heart raced as she tried again to turn the handle. But it was useless. The house wasn't letting them leave. Another voice, this time louder and clearer, reverberated through the walls. "Sir, you cannot leave." Suddenly, the house came alive with a force that knocked Evelyn back. The walls trembled, the floorboards groaned under invisible weight. The windows rattled, the glass vibrating with an unnatural hum. It was as if the very foundation of Whitley Manor was alive, and it was coming for them. Jax growled louder, his body trembling in fury. But even the dog's instinctive defense couldn't stop what was happening. The house was not just playing tricks anymore. It was striking back, and it was angry. Chapter 10, 18 days until Halloween. Evelyn's hands trembled as she let go of the door handle, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The cold wind continued to howl through the cracked windows, making the shadows dance in the corners of the house. The floor beneath her feet felt unstable, like the entire structure was shifting, moving, alive. "Mom." Eli's voice was barely above a whisper. He stood next to her, his face pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What the hell is happening?" Evelyn didn't have an answer. The house, it was the answer. It was alive. It knew them, watched them, and now it was toying with them. The whispers, those cursed whispers, were getting louder, coming from the walls, the ceilings, the floors. It was like the house was speaking to them, speaking through every crack, every imperfection, every hidden room. And it was telling them one thing: they were trapped. "Get away from the door," Evelyn urged, grabbing Eli's arm and pulling him back toward the kitchen. Behind them, the door groaned in protest, the handle rattling as if something or someone was trying to force their way through. But the door wouldn't budge. It wasn't just locked, it was sealed shut by something darker than any lock or bolt. A sudden, sharp scream echoed through the house, followed by the frantic sounds of scurrying footsteps. The kids had heard it too. No one was safe anymore. They had all felt the house close in around them, but now it was as if the house was alive, hunting them. "I need to call someone," Evelyn muttered, her phone shaking in her hand. But as she swiped to unlock it, the screen went black. She tried again. Nothing. Her heart sank. The house was cutting them off from the outside world. There would be no help. Her mind raced. She had to figure out a way out. Any way out. But the walls themselves seemed to shift, pulling them into a maze they couldn't escape. "We're running out of time," Eli said, his voice tense with anxiety. "What about the town? The sheriff? Maybe they know something." Evelyn's eyes flickered to the front door again, the one that wouldn't open, and the thought of Sheriff Mike Larry flashed in her mind. The tough, no-nonsense sheriff who knew the history of this town better than anyone. But he didn't believe in the supernatural. And if he didn't believe what was happening inside Whitley Manor, he wouldn't understand. But then, as if on cue, the house groaned once more, louder this time, a visceral sound that rattled through Evelyn's bones. She felt it in the air, the shift, the weight. Something had changed. The house wasn't just playing games anymore. It was preparing for something. And that something was Halloween. Evelyn realized with chilling clarity that in exactly 18 days, something was going to happen. The house had a purpose. It had been waiting for something, for someone, for Halloween. A shiver ran down her spine. Halloween, the night when the veil between worlds grew thin, the night when the dark forces that lived in the shadows could rise to full strength. "Mom?" Noah's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was standing in the doorway to the living room, his face pale with fear. "What's going on? Why is the house doing this?" She wanted to say something comforting. She wanted to tell him that everything would be fine, that they'd get out, that they could survive. But the words caught in her throat. How could she promise that when the house itself was threatening to swallow them whole? "We need to leave," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to find a way out of here before it's too late. We have 18 days until Halloween." "What happens then?" Eli asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not good. We need to get to the sheriff. We need to make him believe us. Maybe he knows more about the history of this house than we do. The town, the people here, they all know something. Something is coming." Jax growled low in his throat, a deep guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the room. Evelyn turned to look at him, and his eyes locked with hers, filled with a primal fear. The house was waiting. It could feel the impending arrival of Halloween, feel the shift in the air that came with it. And as the days slipped by, every hour, every minute, would pull them closer to the horrors that lay in store. 18 days. The countdown had begun. Chapter 11. The town's ultimate fear and the legends of the 5 monsters. Danksville was a town that whispered its fears behind closed doors, in hushed voices passed between generations. The children of the town grew up hearing warnings disguised as old wives' tales, as cautionary bedtime stories meant to keep them safe. But deep down, everyone knew those stories were real. They weren't just myths. They weren't just legends. They were history. And at the heart of those whispered fears stood 5 monsters. Even Sheriff Mike Larry, hardened and skeptical, had grown up with these tales. He never believed them, not really. But as he sat in his office that night, staring at the case files spread across his desk, a deep unease settled in his gut. The Ashford family, the mansion, the things happening inside it. The town had seen this before, and it never ended well. Mike exhaled, running a hand over his face. He reached for his whiskey, downing a sip as he flipped open an old, yellowed newspaper clipping. 5 vanish without a trace in Whitley Manor, October 31st, 1893. The bodies were never found, only the blood remained. His eyes scanned the words he had read 1,000 times before. 5 people had disappeared that night. But it wasn't just any 5. It was them. The 5 monsters, the legends of the 5 monsters. Danksville's elders spoke of them as things that should never have existed, beings that had been human once, but had become something other. They had names once, too, but the town had long since forgotten them. Now they were only remembered by their curses. 1. The Hollow Man, the one who wears your face. They said he was once a respected man, a doctor who healed the sick. But the night his family burned alive in Whitley Manor, something inside him snapped. He cut away his own face piece by piece, trying to carve himself a new one, a perfect one. Now the Hollow Man walks among the living, taking the faces of his victims, wearing them like masks. He can look like anyone, be anyone, the perfect imposter. You could be speaking to him right now and never know it, until it's too late. Abilities can shift his face to mimic anyone he has killed. Imitates voices, memories, and habits with perfect I'll go through the previous chapters and weave in the new versions of the 5 monsters, making sure their presence is felt through whispers, illusions, and eerie encounters before their full reveal. Here's an updated breakdown of key moments. Chapter 3. The town's ultimate fear and the legends of the 5 monsters. The kids at school don't just whisper about Whitley Manor. They speak of them. The 5 that never leave. The ones who watch. The Whispering Widow. She's in the walls, one student mutters. If you hear her whisper your name, you're already hers. The Skin Lurker. He could be anyone, even your mom or dad, even you. The Harvest Man. He comes with the wind in autumn. He plants seeds inside you, and by the time you feel them, it's too late. The Shattered King. He was a ruler once, now he's looking for a new kingdom. If he likes you, he'll keep you. The Child of Shadows. They say if you wake up and see a kid standing in the dark, don't move, blink, don't breathe. This is more than just playground gossip. The fear in their voices is real. Chapter 5, The First Signs. When Amelia is exploring the house, she hears soft whispering coming from the walls. It's a woman's voice. It's gentle. But when she listens closely, she hears her own thoughts, her own fears being spoken back to her. The Whispering Widow is beginning to reach for her. Jax, the pit bull, growls at something unseen in the hallway mirror. His fur bristles as he stares at his reflection, until the reflection of Jax smiles back. The Skin Lurker has noticed the family. Late at night, the wind howls outside the house, carrying with it the scent of soil and decay. The sound of scratching can be heard from outside the window, not at the glass, but from the trees themselves. A single dead leaf falls onto the windowsill, and when it touches the floor, it rots instantly. The Harvest Man is stirring. Jonah, one of the sons, wakes up sweating from a nightmare. In his dream, a tall man in broken armor stood in his bedroom doorway, watching him with burning red eyes. When he looked in the mirror, he saw himself, but his body was covered in cracks like glass, and something inside him was screaming. The Shattered King is testing him. Lillian, the youngest daughter, tells her parents she was playing with a boy in the shadows. When they ask who, she shrugs. I don't know. He didn't tell me his name, but he said he likes me. The Child of Shadows is making Jax Knows the Truth updated. Jax is on edge. The loyal pit bull begins refusing to enter certain rooms. He growls at empty spaces, stares at walls as if he sees something moving inside them. Then one night, he goes wild, snarling and barking in the hallway. When the family rushes out, they see what Jax sees. A long, tattered black gown is disappearing into the darkness at the end of the hall. And for the first time since moving in, every member of the Ashford family feels it. They are not alone.
Okay, everybody. I hope you guys like that story right there from the Mushroom Kingdom. They came from outside. This is going to be one of these that I will drop once a week. So look for the next episode to drop on Friday. I'm going to detail this up really, really good. Make this a whole lot better. And make this as top-notch as possible story. Adding more to it. Writing more to it. Involving the story as it goes along. Thank you guys for listening to my podcast, The Mushroom Kingdom. It will get more and more interesting as we go along on this journey together. I promise you that. So look forward to episode 2 Friday, actually. And then after this Friday will be once a week. All right.